Okay, good morning. Thank you very much for being here today with us. My name is Paulina Segovia. I'm a coordination consultant and also science communicator and the Global Science of Learning Education Network. And I'm here today with Professor Megan McClelland, and she is a professor at Oregon State University and also director of the Hallie Center for Healthy Children and Family. Thank you very much, Megan, for being here with us. And I would like to give you some minutes if you would like to introduce your work before starting talking about knowledge brokering.
Sure. Thanks so much for having me. This is very fun. I enjoy talking about this sort of thing. I'm very passionate about translating high quality research. The work that I do as a team, science kind of projects around the world with colleagues, students, and friends, honestly, really focus on how do we help support children's and optimize children's development, especially around the areas of what we call cognitive or foundational skills like self-regulation and executive function. And those skills really, in a nutshell, are the how you learn skills. Those are the skills that allow kids to stop and think and pay attention and focus and remember what they need to do and then do something. And so those self-regulation skills allow you, the how you learn skills allow you then to take in what you learn. So all the academic and school content that children are exposed to is much easier. They can navigate those settings. Children can navigate those settings much more easily when they can focus and pay attention and sit still and persist and remember what they need to do. So we look at the importance of those skills, how you measure them in young children in fun and engaging ways that are low cost and can be used in any setting. And then how do we improve them? We also look a lot at interventions that are scalable, feasible, low cost, that can be implemented easily, as well as sort of the importance of these skills for long-term outcomes, short, school success, and then long-term outcomes, life outcomes.
And I know that you work, also part of your work is to implement your research as well. And that is one part of the knowledge brokering, right? This multi-directional process when we try to bring science into practice, also public policies to ensure that research is implemented in education. What is your definition of knowledge brokering, if it is something different to that?
I think we are talking about very similar things. When I think of knowledge brokering, to me, I go right to sort of that research to practice pipeline, but the pipeline is not one direction, right? It has to really be bi-directional and even dynamic and iterative, if I could say it that way, because the work that we do, we test something and then we test it though in collaboration, partnership with the people who will be using it, because they're the experts in how this might work. So often when we're looking at a self-regulation intervention that's going to be implemented in classrooms by teachers, we worked with master teachers and we had them try something out, and then they said, oh yes, this is good, this is not good. And then we iterate, we refine it, and we test again and we refine it. But it's a very bi-directional relationship. To me, what's really important is understanding that the community partners or the teachers, the educators that we work with are getting something valuable that is useful for them, and that they are having significant input into what we're developing, because our whatever we develop only works if people out there can use it easily and feasibly.
And what do you think are the key skills that people interested in bringing science into practice should develop to make this process efficient and with good outcomes?
That's a good question. From a cognitive scientist, and my background is developmental psychology, but I was trained by someone who really believed in doing research in the real world. And from the very beginning, he said to me, this is Fred Morrison, and he said, this work will only have an impact if you're out there studying children, working with children and families in the real world. And so I think from the very beginning, having an appreciation for the importance of how the work that you're doing, some it's not, some it's really relevant and important to have it within a more contained laboratory setting, but always with an eye towards how is this going to be, can it be translated into practice? How can it be translated? And what do we have to think about to make it translated? And so having a real appreciation for how children and families, this might impact them, and educators out in the real world is, I think, really critical. And then working directly with them. And for me, what really drove me was realizing that I had important pieces of the puzzle, and they brought really important impact or a perspective to this collaboration, this partnership that really informed and in fact drove the work that we did. So it wasn't me as a researcher saying, you knew to do these things. It was the people in the community coming and saying, you need to do these things because this is what we need. And I went, oh, this is really important to listen to, because then I'm going to develop something that's actually usable for and useful, honestly, to people in the real world.
I have heard the same explanation for different scientists who work in the field, and
Yeah.
it is so interesting to realize that when they were studying science, like an undergraduate or
A graduate or a
yeah, graduate,
postdoctoral.
thank you.
Yeah.
They weren't taught of it, but when they started doing the research and they started communicating with their subjects, they realized I haven't
Yeah.
thought about it.
I
Another,
think in our graduate training now, I'll just add quickly that
yeah.
we, many programs are focusing a lot more on the application because we have to, because there's either our funders require it, the people that are funding the work that we do. There's a huge focus on dissemination. How will you share? How will you disseminate? That's part of our grants, as well as when you write papers, or, how are you going to have an impact, or is it going to have an impact on what's happening in the real world? And so I think that now things have changed quite considerably in my area anyway.
Mhm. And in your case, that you collaborate with different countries as well to implement your research, what is the importance of context, of different context in bringing research into practice?
Yes, this is a really good point and question. So I think one strength to have as a researcher is to be curious and open to all the different possibilities, because I'll give two examples. One, we have a measure that we use to study self-regulation or assess these skills in young children. It's a game. It's called the head, toes, knees, shoulders task. It takes about 5 minutes. It doesn't require any materials. So it's very easy and short. It's in 31 languages, and it's used all over the world. People would come and ask to use this measure, and they would say, well, is it going to work in Africa? Will it work in Asia? Will it work in Australia? And I would say, I don't know. You should try it out, test it out, and then see how it works and whether it works and if you need to modify. And so we have done this work for 15 years. We have a study called a meta-analysis where we brought together hundreds of studies that used this measure now. And it predicts how kids do in school, how young children do academically. And it didn't depend on the context that they were in, which was quite interesting. But there are some very interesting other differences that by context, gender, other kinds of differences. And what I think is the best thing is to test it in different contexts and to find out what happens. And then publish those papers so that can guide research moving forward. So we've been able to do that. That's one example of being very open, I think, and curious about possibilities. And then with that's a measure that we use. And then we have an intervention program that we have developed for self-regulation and school readiness called Red Light, Purple Light. And that's a series of games. I said we had friends in Norway, colleagues in Norway that wanted to use these games. And I said, oh yeah, that's interesting. You know, you might need to adapt them to be appropriate for the cultural context and be, you know, what is going to work or be relevant for children and educators in that context. So we've tested it in Turkey, we've tested it in Australia. We have colleagues that have used the games in Norway, and it's interesting to see that there are some parts that we say, well, it needs to follow the sequence, you know, if you want to find sort of the same effects, then we need to have some of that. But within that, it's also an interesting question to see what needs to be adapted to be more appropriate. And I think the more you can be open and curious about those possibilities, the more successful you'll be.
That's so interesting. Also, flexibility and networking, I think, is very important. Collaboration, right, in knowledge brokering. In your experience, what organizations of other people that you know are doing this knowledge brokering process in a very good way?
I have been involved in some collaborations and like a fellowship through the Jacobs Foundation that was present and now through some other foundations, and it's called the Learning Sciences Exchange. And that is an example of a program, a fellowship that brings together very unique, interesting collaboration that brings together people in different countries that focus on, there's a researcher, there's a science journalist on a team, it might be a social entrepreneur, as well as a children's media person and a policy person. So when I was involved as a fellow, I was involved with the science journalist was an amazing journalist from London. Our public policy person was from Germany, and we worked with a children's media person from LA, Los Angeles, who worked on children's public television shows, public PBS in America.
Oh, yeah.
And so it was really fascinating because we brought together people who, and I was the researcher, and we developed a baby's board book that was definitely research based, but we had an illustrator. It had such a greater impact because it was this collaboration of the research as well as someone who was an expert with children's media and how do you develop a product that's very engaging for families and caregivers, as well as a science journalist who knows how to translate and, as you know, communicate. And so it was a very, very important, interesting experience. And so that's one example, not so much of an organization, but of a program that is really taking the research and figuring out how do we translate this in ways that are effective, that are engaging, that have uptake and are scalable, and also have policy implications. So that's called the Learning Sciences Exchange. And I should also mention that it's also goes through New America, which is a policy organization. So actually, I should mention an organization like New America because they do a lot of this kind of work. I think also of the Brookings Institution. I'm pretty much thinking, I know UNESCO is doing, obviously, as you know, lots of good work in this area. But policy organizations like New America are very well positioned for taking high quality research. And so they are the ones that organize this Learning Sciences Exchange in collaboration with the funder.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Also, what are the barriers that you consider impact the knowledge brokering process?
If I'm thinking of the research to practice pipeline or the knowledge brokering that goes between research and practice, I would say there are barriers on both sides. For the research side, we, as you noted, are typically not trained to be a science communicator. We are not trained to know how to translate our work in ways that are understandable, are easy to digest, that are scalable and feasible for often. So there's a real disconnect between this wonderful high quality research and then the lack of impact because we aren't able to connect it to the real world in some ways. I think that's getting better. The other part of that, though, is on the research side, a lot of, if you're an academic researcher, you often don't get rewarded for this kind of work. The reward structure, what is if you're in academics, in higher education, in America anyway, and I know in other countries it's somewhat similar, that's really focused on having a very well-respected program of research that you can publish and you can get grant funding to support, and you are mentoring graduate students who then will go on and do wonderful things in the field. And a lot of times, the kind of work that is required for that knowledge brokering takes a long time. It takes a lot of relationship building, as I know you know, we all know, and that is difficult when you have to demonstrate and show impact more quickly, perhaps. And so that I think is a big challenge, especially so often you have more freedom to do some of this work after you get promoted or after you get tenure in an academic institution. On the other side, the barriers in the practice side are just the incredible amount of the burdens that are being faced by educators, by families, in just everything that they're required to do. In the work that I do, we work a lot with early childhood educators. Those educators in America, anyway, in the United States, are very underpaid. They're extremely burned out, they're burdened. Even we also work with teachers in the elementary or primary school settings, and those teachers are so stressed to meet the needs of an increasingly difficult set of children who are coming out of COVID still, who are really experiencing lots of challenges. And so to them, it's just very difficult to get them to even try something, even though there's, like, when we work with teachers in schools about our intervention, it's difficult for them to see that, wow, the things that this program actually has been shown to improve children's behavior. Like, we really have evidence that it improves behavior and it improves academic success. But to get teachers to sign up to be part of it seems overwhelming to them sometimes. So I think they just have so many competing priorities and other barriers that they're facing that it's difficult.
I understand both sides that you have mentioned, like the barriers are more systemic, right? How the system works in the academic and also at schools, education in several countries. Maybe some countries have that part a little bit better conditions for educators, but it's not worldwide, unfortunately.
Absolutely. It's really unfortunate.
Yeah. Focusing on GSOLEN, what do you think could be the role of GSOLEN in knowledge program?
I think we need a connector. So I think that I act as a connector a lot between, in my areas of work. And I remember we have a lot of researchers are very passionate. They have really good things they're doing, and they don't have maybe the connections to the community organizations or the NGOs, especially at a broader with a broader reach internationally, right? In other countries, in other contexts. And so I actually think there's a lot of we can do that GSOLEN can do in this area. And this is, I'm sure, exactly why you're doing what you're doing. But I think that the more we can connect the research to those partners and organizations in different countries and contexts, I think that it's incredible the amount of impact that we can have. And also because I think that the knowledge gained by those organizations and partners is huge. It's really needed for research to be able to be scaled, if I could put it that way. If you really want to have a broad impact and you really want to put into practice effective evidence-based strategies and tools and programs, we really need to do much, much better at connecting the partners. We, in my own local district, or in other districts, there's a very big gap sometimes between a program that a school is using that has no evidence whatsoever, but there's no research to support that it works. And then the researcher who's trying to do good work and has some evidence, but does not know how to translate it in a way or get it out to practice in a way that would be effective and usable by those educators. So this gap is local. I think it's regional. I think it's international. And I think GSOLN could play a big role in the connector that breaks down that.
And how did you overcame that barrier with your own research when you started in your lab, and then now you have told us that it's been translated into 31 languages and it's been used in different continents. In your experience, how was it? What did you do?
I started small. I made friends. I had a measure with a colleague, Claire Cameron. We worked on this together in partnership and with other colleagues, and we made it accessible. And people would request the measure, and I would say, "Oh, yeah, but I don't have it in, gosh, in Greek. I don't have that measure in Greek. If you can use it, if you translate it, can you share it back so that then we can build out, something?" And as you develop those individual relationships with people and you give them access to a reliable and valid measure that was funded through 2 different measurement grants at the federal level here in the United States. So we had a lot of evidence that it was a high quality measure. Once you start building those relationships, then and then we would combine data, we would test it in different places. And so that sort of built and kind of accumulated over time. That's really how it happened, I think. Just it started small, and then I just was open, and our colleagues were open, and we were made friends.
But I think it's very important as well to have this view that your research is to make an impact, right, in society. It's not just to have a paper and publish it and keep it there, like safely.
Yeah.
For you, safely means that it has an impact in the community.
And if I'm going to have an impact, I better make sure that it's relevant and useful for the people out there in that context. And it may look different in a different country, in a different context, in a different state. And so I think being open and curious is really important to drive this work forward, and also to have the impact you might want to have. And I think, the thing that's wonderful about research and is you can do what you're really passionate about. And for me, I'm also really passionate about making something usable and feasible for people to be able to implement in their everyday lives or in the real world.
I'm very thankful for your time and all that you have shared with us today. Yeah.
No problem at all. I hope that it was helpful and in what you were looking for. I love talking about these things, so I'm very happy to have the opportunity.
Me too. I'm really passionate about this. So thank you very much. Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye.